Thank you. Um, Delighted that it's a full house and we are able to start before time. So that's quite a delight. And that's actually the benefit of calling for a meeting over breakfast, because that's where the time and schedules are very predictable. Otherwise you never know what goes in the day, what firefighting you get into. So thank you very much, and welcome to today's roundtable discussion over breakfast. I hope all of you have had your breakfast, and I also hope that it will be kept like it is. So post the meeting is over, you can still have some more. The topic, I'll speak for a while on the topic itself. Changing gears, shifting towards a modern data protection strategy. Now, that has, in a way, it becomes very insignificant in no time. Data protection strategies are very dynamic. What is going to happen in the next 6 months, we don't know today. And how will this goalpost move to a new goalpost? How will the strategies be redefined, reworked? At this point in time, it is very difficult to predict. However, I'm sure, in the benefit of protecting the data assets, protecting the crown jewels in the organization, protecting the critical infrastructure of your organizations, it is imperative that we have a robust strategy and plan in place, because what's happening around us is not just scary, it is becoming lethal day by day. And now before I go on to set the context, let me introduce two gentlemen sitting on my right and left. Starting with Kevin Isaac. Kevin is the Chief Revenue Officer for FORCEPOINT. Some of you may have got the opportunity to meet Kevin. He leads the organization's global sales and channel organization, supporting customers and partners in development of human-centric security systems. We'll hear from him what is this human-centric security systems all about. Which protect employees, critical business data, and intellectual property in any sort of environment. He's championing customer engagement across the entire FORCEPOINT portfolio, focusing on risk adaptive protection that delivers adaptive security through behavioral analytics. Now, looking at him, you can't say that he has spent 30 years in the industry. You must be close to your retirement, Kevin, aren't you?
I started when I was young.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. Well, yeah, it was just a small pun. He joined FORCEPOINT in August 2017 as Vice President of Sales for EMEA, and then continues to be with the organization. On my left, another veteran, Surendra Singh. Surendra is the Senior Director and Country Manager at FORCEPOINT. Surendra, you must have spent a lot of time, 14 years at FORCEPOINT, is it?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yes, I have spent 14 years, and this has been a lovely journey. Our industry is very, very dynamic, and this company also has been very, very dynamic. So a wonderful experience, wonderful 14 years, and continue to do some more years.
Yeah, so before joining FORCEPOINT, Surendra headed the South Asian region for RSA. So this is the introduction of the two gentlemen sitting here. Now just to set the context for today's discussion, after which I will ask both of them to share their macro level thoughts and macro level views on what they think the industry is grappling with, what they think the customers are grappling with, what they think the technology providers are gearing up with, what are the new technologies that they are working, where is the innovation happening, which is the area to focus more on. I will just refer to a few data points, not in terms of dollars, billions, nothing like that. And these are slightly old data points. However, when they were mentioned, they were mentioned in the form of predictions for 2020. Now, since we are going to usher 2020 in the next 1 month's time, it's a good time to reflect. So, according to a slightly older research by an entity called Identity Theft Resource Center, it said that leading causes of data breaches are hacking, skimming, of phishing. I think everybody will agree to that. There may be a few more reasons to breaches, but primarily these three, which account for more than half the data breaches, followed by email or internet attacks and employee error. And citing that report, Reuters once reported that vast majority of hacking attacks are successful because employee click on links in tainted emails. Companies fail to apply available patches to known software flaws, or technicians do not configure properly. Now, is it sounding some bell? And these are something which, these are the facts which everybody knows, but still they, inadvertently they happen in any organization. However, a more recent research suggests that 2/3 of the organization, which means around 69%, feel they suffered a data breach due to an insider threat, and confirmed they had a DLP solution in place at the time of intrusion. Insider threats from current and departing employees caused data breaches, and legacy solutions fell short in getting the job done, which means we may have applied or deployed a solution, but didn't care to upgrade it or didn't care to change it, and therefore that appliance or that solution in today's era is as good as defunct or not useful. Interestingly, now this is where I want your attention. Interestingly, a group of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley's Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, in the year 2016, were looking beyond the year 2020. And basis their extensive research, which actually was a result of talking to 2,000 security professionals around the world, one-on-one discussion, they came up with 5 scenarios. Now, these are scenarios not to be mistaken with any predictions. These are models not amounting to any prediction. No scenario or implication may have come true fully or partially. Now, hear them out. Scenario 1, in which they give 5 bullet points that will create the new normal for cybersecurity. Keep in mind, it is 2016. Internet users in 2020 assume their data will be stolen and their personal information will be broadcast. Is there anybody who can counter this claim? No one in this room. Law enforcement struggles to keep pace as large-scale cyber attacks continue, with small-scale cyber attacks becoming commonplace. Again, established fact. And we are yet not in 2020. Governments are hamstrung by a lack of clarity regarding jurisdiction in digital crime cases. Hackers prove adept at collaborating across geographies, so the syndicates are now more in collaboration than the industry itself, while law enforcement agencies are not. So, and the fifth point that they made in the first scenario was individuals and institutions respond in diverse ways. A few choose to go offline to protect their reputation and business. Some make their data public before it can be stolen, and others fight back. So a very minuscule percentage of people do fight back, refuse to pay ransomware, for example. The scenario 2, models capable of accurately predicting and manipulating the behavior of individuals have been developed in 2020, which is true based on the technologies like artificial intelligence, automation. Scenario 3, the advertising model for major internet companies falls apart. As businesses collapse, they will attempt to recoup their losses by selling potentially valuable data assets to interested parties, specifically criminals. Now again, it is not a prediction, they are just presenting a scenario which is very, very, very scary. Scenario 4, like anything new, the Internet of Things will experience growing pains, in particular cybersecurity weaknesses, which adversaries will quickly exploit. For example, rather than co-opt signal devices, hackers will tamper with and repurpose entire IoT network, which is seemingly going to happen. The last scenario, wearables will track more than the heart rate and the number of steps taken. At that time, the wearables were just a fancy device to calculate your heart rate and steps. With devices monitoring hormone levels, facial expressions, voice tone, and more, the internet is now a vast system of emotional readers, touching the most intimate aspects of human psychology. These technologies allow an individual's underlying mental, emotional, and physical state to be tracked and manipulated. So these are the 5 scenarios that were presented in 2016 for 2020, and almost all of them are sounding very, very realistic. So with these words, I would like to now request Kevin to share his thoughts, not on what I have read, but what his understanding is about the global scenario, the global threats, the global industry, and the challenges that he comes across when he speaks to the users, like you are sitting in the room. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time, everybody. It's great to meet you all. Thank you. So I'll cover a few things. It's quite interesting that look back from 4 years ago. It's quite accurate, isn't it? By the way, FORCEPOINT just released its view for 2020 and 2021, and I'm sure that you can get that from the team if you're interested in having a look at the predictions. But I'll start by making a statement, and I'm not going to talk about FORCEPOINT here. I'm going to talk about industry. I'll let my colleague here talk about FORCEPOINT. The first thing I'll say is, in the last 7 years, $1 trillion has been spent on cybersecurity software globally by you. And on behalf of my family, thank you very much. $1 trillion in 7 years. My question to you is, in the last 7 years, do you feel any safer on the internet for the $1 trillion that's been spent? And I would like to pose a hypothesis to you. The hypothesis is that cybersecurity is not working. It's not working. There's a 95% success rate right now for the hackers. Let's face it. Now, I'm sure all of you dream about having a new car. I do. And you can imagine the car you're thinking about in your mind. You walk into the dealership, you walk up to the salesman, and the salesman says to you, you may have it. And the good news is that the brakes are going to work 98% of the time. The brakes are only going to fail 2% of the time. Are you going to buy that car? In any other industry on earth, the failure that we're seeing in cybersecurity would be unacceptable. In financial services, if the banks promise to keep your money safe 90% of the time, it's unthinkable, right? And I know that I'm making an issue of this, but it is an issue. We have to face the reality that cybersecurity is not working. So that's my first hypothesis that I put in front of you. We have to change the paradigm. Something has to change. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back in time and let's look at the history of cybersecurity. Thank you very much for pointing out how old I am. In the 1990s, when we began the journey in cybersecurity, the age of what we call infrastructure was in place. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen earlier about infrastructure. And what we had was two things. We had firewalls and we had antivirus, basically. And firewalls were looking at north-south traffic. It was a north-south traffic discussion, very, very low on the, on the infrastructure stack. And antivirus started looking at malware that was being produced, basically, mostly for notoriety. So that was the age of infrastructure. The next thing that happened towards the millennium was the age of information. So we moved from infrastructure security to information security. And this is where we started looking at the value of information and the realization that PCs and computers were not what was valuable, but it was the data that was valuable. And I can remember arguing with CIOs in, shall I say, 1999, 2001 timeframe, that the value of the information was going to become more important than the value of the infrastructure that they put in. Mm-hmm. And I can remember those days when you got a new laptop, it was like gold. And it was an amazing thing, you know. Nowadays, if you lose this, it's no problem. It's the information that's more valuable. Isn't that amazing that in 20 years our thinking has changed to the fact that this is just a utility. It's just what's inside it is what's really important. So the age of information became really key. And inside that age of information, we saw technology like DLP, and we saw things like encryption becoming massively important. How many of you remember PGP? And the arguments about that. I met the gentleman who wrote PGP. He had tremendous problems with the US government because of the export of that of those algorithms at the time. And the journey that these people went on in terms of their, because it was seen as such an important technology at the time. So we went through this age of information security. By the way, CASB kind of fits in that space now as well, even though it's a newer technology. It's still part of an information security type play. And this is unfortunately where many of the cybersecurity companies went to die. Or a number of the legacy cybersecurity companies have died in the information security age, so to speak. And you can think of yellow one and you can think of a red one. I'm not going to mention their names. But these companies have stopped on the information security journey and they never moved on. They never innovated. And as a result, they've been bought, they've been sold, they've been traded out, and they've lost their ability to operate. Fair enough? The next evolution that we saw probably in the last 7 years is what we call analytics security. Analytics security is best described through what Splunk, for example, are doing. Where they start, they're a data analytics company, and they've formed an adjacency in cyber, where they're starting to analyze data. And in that space, they're able to correlate information. We saw the security operations centers would be a good example of analytics security. And they started back in 2001, 2002. We saw the first security operations centers. Would you believe it that now in some of the Fortune 500 companies, they are switching off their security operations centers because they've become defunct? The security operations centers now are great for forensics, but they're not stopping bad things happening. They're not stopping bad things happening. And when I look at companies like the company I mentioned, you're looking at what we call analytics 1 inch deep and 1 mile wide. So you're looking for a needle in a needle stack. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to understand that. And so the fourth and current age of cybersecurity is what we call human behavioral cybersecurity. So based on human behavior as opposed to analytics, specifically on systems. And I would argue with you that the human has become the center of cyber security. Why? Well, let's go back to infrastructure security. When companies designing next generation firewalls, what did they do? They started to go up the stack, and they got to layer 7, right? Mm-hmm. Where they could start to become application aware. So they were going north-south and east-west in the way that they analyze data, and it became quite useful for a while. I'm not talking about layer 7 anymore. I tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about layer 8. Layer 8 in the stack is you, is me.
Human layer.
It's the human layer. That's where the real problems start and finish. Now, I'm sure you've looked at the reports about data breaches. At the end of the day, FORCEPOINT is a data protection company because data is what it's all about. You know, if it's not humans, it's data. So when you talk cyber, critical national infrastructure, if electricity is shut down or there's a water crisis, it will affect humans. If you lose your bank account information or your money, it's data. Okay, so it's one of the two, humans or data. So when these two things collide, that we have a challenge. So so for us, when we look at this, what we're trying to do is create an environment where we can start to analyze the correlation between the two and how the two are working together. And I would say, as I said, humans are becoming the center of the network. And I would argue with you that systems management needs to change. So, for my friends who are experts in systems management, you know that you will set policies and you will roll those policies out to departments or to user groups or to systems within an environment. And those systems then will run policies at the user level. I would argue that this device is different to any other device that is in this room. It's different to yours, it's different to anyone else's. Why? Because my policies and my needs are different to anybody else's. Yeah. We have to take the infrastructure, you imagine the org chart, 1 to 5 to 50 to 5,000, and we have to invert it and make the human the nexus for the policies, and then roll everything else down from that. And I would say to you that as we move forward, and I will close shortly, as we go forward, we've got to make humans the center of our system. We've got to write individual policies for every single person in an organization if we're going to be successful. And to go back to your point about hackers, there are 3 types of people on your network right now. 3 types of people. The first are three types of threats on your network. The first is the insider, the person who's doing their job and accidentally loses data for you. The second is the insider on your network who maliciously takes away data because they hate your company or they have a problem. And the third is the hacker who's in there because they're trying to break into your systems. I would argue with you that right now they are in your network already. The concept of keeping people out is an old concept. They are in your network right now. And let me finish with one question to you. How many of you have got an identical twin? Anybody got an identical twin? Brother or sister? Okay. Here's my hypothesis. And I've checked this with some twins. I've spoken to some twins. If you had a twin, and your spouse had a twin, and they came home one night, the twin came home instead of the spouse, husband or wife, dressed exactly the same way. The question I had to the spouse was, would you recognize the fact that it was not your spouse, but it was the twin? Yeah. Would you recognize? What do you think?
Yes.
I agree. And the answer is yes. How?
Behavior.
Behavior, inflection, the comment, the mannerism. It's just, Yeah. And you can talk to parents who have got twins. And you say, how do you know the difference between them? We just know. We just know. My argument or my hypothesis to you is nobody knows your people better than you do in your network. Hackers could pretend to be you. They could steal your 2-factor authentication. Zero trust is marketing. There is no such thing as zero trust. People can steal 2-factor authentication. The only way to know if somebody is who they are on a network is to understand the behavior and to use, and I don't use the words AI because AI is not true. AI is still a dream. ML. And how many of you have heard of big data?
Everybody.
Okay. How many of you have heard of thick data? Okay, so thick data. This is what thick data is. Thick data is ML combined with human intuition and intelligence from humans. So we have a lab called X Labs, where we run algorithms around human behavior, and we weave in human intelligence and human intuition and human analytics on that ML to create a version of AI, but because of course computers cannot provide AI right now. But thick data for us is the key here in terms of understanding human behavior, so that we can drive and manage cyber. Now I can talk about software and whether it works or not. DLP, for example, is challenged, but I'm going to stop now because I've probably spoken too much. I hope that was interesting for you.
Yeah,
Oh, it was.
It was good.
All right.
Now you see the difference between a person who was reading from a paper and a true storyteller. So you get so engrossed that I couldn't dare stop you because you had overexceeded your time. Again. No, it was very interesting, and how you presented the 4 stages of evolution in the cybersecurity. I think articulated in a way where volumes can be written and still can't be understood. But in 10 minutes you summarized how the whole industry, from the age of infrastructure to the age of human behavioral cybersecurity, we have traveled a long journey.
Yeah.
So and have all this while increased the complexities for ourselves. Okay, so a little is left for you, but yeah.
I can say I too was engrossed with Kevin. I just forgot what to say.
That was too philosophical and too global.
Yeah.
So you can actually bring it down to the brass tacks and
Yeah. So see, in my job, I keep meeting Indian customers, and much of Kevin has already raised. One thing I would like to add here is that when I'm talking to them, and typically I ask them, what are your goals, aspirations, what are the challenges? One common challenge which comes across everywhere is that how we balance our digital transformation, digitizing, or technology, or business initiatives with cyber risk. Because apparently both are going into different directions. And the subtext is how we make security more user-friendly, because there's a resistance from the business and the users. And let me explain why there is a resistance. In your organization, I think probably varying between from 2,000 to maybe 200,000 seats. That's what the typical 2,000 sales-oriented, 200,000 employees would be better to say. You will be having 99.9% of users, including your employees, customers, and partners, which are individual workers like you and me. We just do our routine work, use data, and go back. And we, as such, pose very, very minimal risk to the organization. And then, as Kevin pointed out, there are some people who are insider threats, very good employees, but due to circumstances, they've changed their attitude or mindset, compulsions, or maybe ideological reasons, and they have now turned against the organization, what we call as insiders. Very few, less than 0.001%, but very lethal. And then there would be some people who have made clicks, wrong clicks, unknowingly or whatever. I mean, they were a bit ignorant or casual about it. And therefore they have got compromised, because some hacker has now their credentials, and that hacker is masquerading them as the authentic employee. Each one of you today is using same security policy for all 3 sets of users. So one set of users which gives you 99.9%, maybe 100% of your productivity, pose very, very little risk. You're using the same security policy. And there are other set of users who pose the maximum risk of users, and you, as security practitioners, we don't even know who they are. With the result that the employees find security not very friendly, and yet our controls, whatever money we are spending on too much, too wide, all 100% people. If we can narrow down and find out those 0.1%, because remember the security breach or data breach happens only in three scenarios. Either you and me are sending data, and mostly it is data, which is cyber breach is all about, is either because some mistakes happen, but I haven't heard any big headlines that some organization has lost lot of data, intellectual data, because of somebody making a wrong email to a wrong person or attaching a wrong file. It happens, but damage is very, very, very small. It's only that 0.1% people who either have got compromised or are insiders, where all the breaches and everything happens. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we have a dynamic policy which is based on the individual risk profile, and it changes when the individual's security posture is changed. That's a direction FORCEPOINT has taken, and obviously I'm not going to talk about the products. Team would be here if you are interested about it, but that would be my perspective from India. And what I heard from also resonates what Frost and Sullivan, where we commissioned one exercise to find them that cyber risk versus digital transformation, what are their challenges, and cyber risk come across as the biggest challenge for that. So I think it resonates what I hear from customers and what Frost and Sullivan, when they did the research with Indian customers, they found it. So that's my idea.
Great. So another thing which has happened in the past 20 minutes is that whatever I wrote in terms of discussion points have all gone redundant. So I'll have to now impromptu rephrase these questions and points to interrogate, points to interact. And what I will pick from here is, you have all heard the 4 stages of the evolution of cybersecurity. Now, I'm very intrigued to ask, at what stage do you find yourself in your organization in these 4 stages? I'm sure it will not be an exaggeration or to predict that most of you will not be in the last stage, which is human behavioral centric. However, where are you stuck? Is your organization still stuck in the first age, which was the age of infrastructure, or have we moved on to the age of information? We perceive the value of data more than the value of utilities, or we have further evolved to the next evolution, which was analytics driven security, where you have deployed even more sophisticated solutions which are more analytics driven. So let's break this ice here and let me gather some points and have a freewheeling conversation between yourself, Kevin, Surendra. I can be spared too. So anyone who wants to pick up. Or is this room too silent? Yes, ma'am, you can go.
Yeah.
Men are too shy.
I think same so. I think being the minority, I think we can go first, right? Yeah. So let me start with I think I like the story you mentioned, how we moved from information journey. I was there in 1990, BSI 7799 certification.
Yes,
we are actually trying to tell information is important. So I resonate that story very well. Thanks for bringing that. Coming to where I'm standing, I think I'll just come to the point, right? So user behavioral, or we can say human-centric analytics, right? That's something is needed for a media industry like News Corp. So I represent News Corp. So News Corp, why? Because what we are working on is based on user behavior. We actually track the user behavior, provide the news accordingly. At the same time, when we are doing the same for our business in general, we need to do the same for security, right? So the user behavior is very important in the security aspect. The point I want to just mention here is, what is the challenge we are facing? The challenges here are two ways, twofold. One fold is that some cases we need to be careful on what we actually observe in Europe. There are cases where you can't monitor everything, right? You need to have that kind of policy that you're actually monitoring all the things, what is happening on the browser or whatever is happening on the endpoint, and you need to have that regulation streamlines that, yes, we are monitoring and it's given. We need to have that signed party, and when we have that, is it okay for India to process that data? You know what I mean, right? It's hosted in Europe, but is it okay for India to process the data and give analytics on user behaviors? So we need to aggregate there and bring it here. Do we need to actually work on the user behavioral analytics without actually calling out the personal or sensitive information? You know what I mean, right? So that's one piece, right? Second piece, what I am facing challenges is the phishing. You know, phishing is the point, right, where human element comes in every time. So no matter whatever the number of trainings we do and the promotional aspects we do, we end up getting phishing even. That happens for most banks and media companies, not away, right? And the reason why I brought this point is the aspects which we use, like cloud. You share file like anything, right? We just share Google Doc and say share with this guy if I want to send something Rahul. Share Rahul. It went, right? In my account, I might not have even removed it. It will be listed as a share as of today. So is it a DLP? Is it not a DLP? Most of the tools what we are testing, as of now I'm going through that, are not able to detect whether it is a share or a leakage. Yeah, those are the two aspects I want to talk about.
Wonderful. So Kevin,
There's three questions.
Yeah, 3 direct questions to you.
Okay, great. So the first one is, I'll use one word to describe your first question, and that is privacy.
Yep.
Okay. So the technology we build has got to be private by design.
Yep.
The good thing about the technology we're building is, and you're right in terms of your hypothesis, but what's important is to build the technology so that it's private by design. So for example, we built in a thing called we call it 6 eyes.
Okay.
So you've got to have 3 people
Okay.
to unlock or unmask the name of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So in Germany, it could be the Workers' Council, the IT, and HR.
Yep.
Before it unmasks the person. You see, what's quite interesting is in Germany, they are quite excited about this technology because it's ML. It's not human. And then there's the other question you didn't ask me was around unconscious bias.
Exactly.
Gender bias, racial bias, sexual bias. These, and being able to baseline so that people are not prejudiced against. What we try to do with our tech, and I can't speak for other companies, but what we try to do with our tech is we try to baseline a person's behavior and say, we don't really care what you're doing. We're not religious, and we're not going to tell you how to live your life. But we're going to look for anomalies in your behavior, changes in your behavior, and things which would suggest that you're under stress or that would suggest that you are changing the way you behave. Good example, the person in the Tesla factory doing their job, and then the next minute they're looking for blueprints for batteries. Why? If you're not making the batteries. And that would indicate a change in behavior, right? So, number one, can we mask the people? Can we build privacy by design? Number 2, can we make sure there's no bias, unconscious bias? And number 3, can we make the ML so automatically, and this is the big trick, automatically block people. So the challenge with data loss is that most data loss is happening, you're finding 200 days later. Somebody was telling me today that they found a hack that happened 5 years ago. In India, by the way, I heard it was on the news.
Yes.
So it was ABB, a Swiss company, ABB, which
Yeah.
actually was breached 5 years ago. They found it
Now.
this week.
So that's nice. And somebody said to me on Monday, they said, how do we reduce the time? And I said, it doesn't make any difference. If it's 1 day or if it's 1,000 days, you still lost your data. What difference does it make? Can you move left of bang? We call that bang when the data leaves. Can you move left of bang? And the only way to move left of bang is to take the AI or the ML, this analytics, and automate it into DLP and automate it into the insider threat technology so that you can block somebody before the data leaves.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a help desk issue. Obviously, you have somebody phoning. But someone said to me, what if it's a minister or if it's the CEO of a company and they get blocked on Saturday and they phone up the CIO and they say, I've been blocked. What's going on? How cool would it be for the CIO to phone him back 2 hours later and say, sir or ma'am, you were blocked because there was somebody else on the network using your credentials and we just saved your reputation. Now it's no longer a problem, but it's a thank you.
Yeah.
So the first thing is privacy, and I think we have that under control. Your second question, phishing. Phishing is going to happen. As I said to you, get over it. People are on your network. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. The story we have is a CEO in the US was at a football match for their 8-year-old. So happy the child scored a goal, first time ever. Went home, never uses Facebook. Just has it, to keep an eye on his friends. He decided to post, I'm so proud of Johnny. He scored his first goal. Immediately on private message, Susan, the mother of the friend, private messaged him and said, hey, I was there, I was videoing it. Would you like a copy of the video? Yes, please. Send me your email address. Sent the email address. Of course, it was not Susan, it was China. And immediately the malware was installed and the guy was phished. So it's going to happen. The question is how do you stop the data exfil? Behavioral analytics. Once the hacker gets on the network because of the phishing attack, can you stop the exfil? You need to accept that phishing is going to happen. What do you do about it? That's the question in terms of data loss. And your last question, Google share, it's more of a technical question.
Yes.
You've got to have DLP, but you can't buy DLP or have DLP on its own. I think one of the things that industry needs to accept is that you cannot buy point products. When you buy DLP, you have to buy CASB, and you have to buy CASB integrated. In future, what's going to happen is CASB will become a feature of DLP, and DLP will become a feature of CASB, depending whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. And as you use CASB and DLP together, you will be able to manage your Google Docs, Access, etc., etc. And the behavioral analytics, for example, is designed in such a way that we can weaponize it. And I use the word weaponize. We can weaponize it to change the policy on the fly, to block Google Docs just like that, if there's a change in behavior. So it can be done, but you need to understand that when you buy technology, you must be prepared to buy technology that can be integrated. That's how you solve that challenge.
I have a follow-up question, but I'll hold it.
No, you can ask. It is going in the flow, so you can continue.
So the point here why I raised the Google aspect, right? So just going into the details, right? So we are actually having a DLP solution. It will actually say that yes, you are sharing or you're downloading. There is an alert on the behavior, right? Saying that a person have downloaded 30 mails today or sharing. This is a behavior analytic which is coming out. The rationale here, and this is because this why I'm calling this out is this is so many times you have so many false positives, thousands of false positives, that you can't handle it at all. So the reason here is we don't use any more local drive, right? There is nothing called local drive. You click, add the person, share. There is nothing called attachment nowadays. Just click a mail, add the name, and it's gone. So it's a share almost, right? If you are sharing it to 20 people, it's a behavioral change already. So you got already a false positive, right? So I know it's too technical, that's why I said we can have an offline discussion. The rationale here is that when we are moving from the standard on-prem attachment kind of scenario to a Google share or any other shared documents, O365 as well, the challenge what we are facing is identifying a DLP really is a challenge. You understand what I
have CISOs in Fortune 500 companies who tell me that DLP doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
It's good for forensics.
Correct.
So
postmortem. Most of the time what we are using is for postmortem. So that's what I say, forget about this, because there's thousands of alerts. How many people I'll put in the SOC to analyze whether it's real share or, oh yeah, Satya went to a conference, she shared the document to 100 people, right? Then it become a massive incident saying Satya shared 100 people a document. That document is generally maybe not be a confidential document, and there is no way that you can actually declare that every time.
Yeah.
And it is the reason why I'm bringing this forward is there are too many false positives in this case where we actually implemented DLP on
It's too
cloud
much
solutions.
noise. It's too much noise.
A lot of noise.
Exactly. So let me give you a philosophical
Yeah.
story. So we're a company of 3,000 people, right? So we have 3,000 people in the company, and we have a security operations center.
Yeah.
So we get probably 1 million alerts per month.
Yeah.
1 million alerts, okay? That need to be, of that, you've got 1% which need to be investigated. 1%. What's 1% of 1 million? 10,000. 10,000 alerts that need to be analyzed every month. That's 120,000 alerts every year. Right? What's 1% of 3,000 people? 30.
30.
And it's not a different 30 people every month.
Same 30.
It's the same 30 people every month. So do you watch the 30 people? Or do you look at 120,000 events? Which one is going to be more likely to stop the bad stuff happening? Now, the question is, can I take the behavioral tools I've got to say, you or I am a risk because I'm unhappy and I'm doing some crazy things? And how do I then change the policy of my DLP for me personally on Google Docs to stop me doing some crazy stuff? And that's the change, or paradigm
Speech.
change.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yes.
A quick question to Kevin. So, all these years we have been fed by multiple research organizations, right? Forrester, Gartner, and all these people. They say invest in reactive controls, not the proactive controls. You consider yourself breached, and you work around putting enough reactive controls, or rather monitoring controls, to detect that.
Yeah.
Which you also reiterated, saying that consider you are, someone is already in. At the same time, you're also mentioning you should not be looking at that, and you should be able to block or prevent as well. So is it technically possible? So in case if I'm the person who really would want to get to the data or whatever I would want to siphon off, so I might have 100 ways. Is it technically possible for me to actually prevent or block all the 100 ways? So even if I'm looking at behavioral analytics or whatever could be the case, so there might be multiple doors which may not even be currently I'm monitoring, or probably I'm not guarding. So how is it, whichever, with every organization you have a limited budget, where do I invest more? And what should be the way for the next 2 or 3 years?
It's a great question. So what you're talking about is assess, protect, respond, recover, life cycle, and you know what, that's still there. And by the way, you need the infrastructure. Even if you have a smart home, you still need the plumbing. You have to have everything in place, right? So none of that goes away. None of that goes away, but what we have to do is make it smart so that you can use it. The reality is that until so we talk about dumb DLP and smart DLP as an example. Which one do you want? And the premise here is that you need the firewalls, you need the proxies, you need the technology to assess, protect, respond, recover. You need all of that, but you need to overlay that with the behavioral intelligence to be able to manage that. Some of the problems that we're facing right now is there's a number of companies out there that are doing things like user behavioral analytics. Beautiful. And you have a beautiful report that you can take to the board, and then you've got teams of people taking it to the SOC and doing forensics on, oh yes, this person, we can see there. That's no use because you haven't stopped the data from leaving. So the big challenge is, can you automate? Can you automate your existing infrastructure to be more proactive, to stop threats from happening? In terms of your question, where do I invest? That's really hard. And I think that comes down to your CIA, your confidentiality, integrity, and availability discussion. I think it comes down to your people, process, and products discussion. And sometimes awareness is more important than buying software. But you know, when you put this thing into the mix, I guess the question you've got to look at and say is, what is my ROCE, and how does my board of directors or my management view my IT spend, and then how do I justify the return on security investment? That would be where I would go if you want to understand where to invest your money. And then look at, so we did a pilot for a company in the US, 250,000 users, and they've been using our DLP for a long time, but they bought our behavioral analytics and they ran a pilot for 1,000 users. In that pilot, they found within 1 week a GDPR incident was stopped, literally stopped before the data left. And the CIO was immediately able to use that to go to the board of directors and ask for budget, because it was clear that if they'd been breached, it would have been hundreds of millions in fines on the GDPR process. And so the cost benefit there was immediately clear. So for you, where to invest? Well, the question is, what's your return that you're looking for? And where is your greatest risk? Is it in what industry you're facing? These are the questions you have to ask yourself first before you start looking at the right decision to make. What I will tell you is most Fortune 500 CISOs that I talk to, and we have an advisory board of about 20 that we work with, tell me that they do not have a budget issue with security. Security is never a budget issue. The challenge is a value issue and an ability to actually convince the board that what they're doing is worthwhile.
Exactly.
That, I think, is the bigger question for you before you make a choice on where to invest.
I have a question.
Yeah. So I think we are having the conversation around the crown jewels and also the regulatory angle of it. So as long as an organization is able to identify what are the crown jewels you are actually trying to protect in the first place, that is that awareness which ultimately as security teams and the board as well have to be aware of. And what are the risks involved in a breach associated with those crown jewels? Now, if that awareness itself is not there, then automatically everything else crumbles like a house of cards, right? So it will not sustain. And if any DLP program needs to be successful, the DLP has to be able to successfully manage anomalies or detect anomalies and do the required protection, if that is how it is going to be set up, against those crown jewels. And then we are talking about overlaying it with behavioral patterns. So coming back to your initial thought on how do we go about processing this further, it's going to be a combination of all these factors, right? So as long as you of course, the industry that you're working in, the kind of data that you are processing, what is the board's take on cybersecurity. Now, thanks to all the large-scale ransomware breaches globally and so on, of course, all the security companies are also making a lot of money out of it. But at the same time, there is a good level of board awareness also in place. So because of which budget is not an issue. Right, it's about what you take to the board as a proposal and when. Right, if you're looking at pitching in a particular proposal to the board, saying that okay, now we need to go take a roadmap of considering a DLP program or a CASP program organization wide. Now, most definitely, you may not even have to go to the board. These days, that because the CISOs themselves or their immediate top management will definitely be able to sign it off, saying that it's a no-brainer, we have to buy it, right? The question is, which product do we go for, right? That is when we come to the product analysis and piloting and so on.
I agree completely. I think that you're right. The crown jewels concept is absolutely right. And most companies will work on 3 or 4 tier architecture and want the most confidential data is and what's not confidential. So, for example, in our company, it's the source code that is the most, important data, and you would find that that stuff would not normally be on a cloud share. It would normally be in a Faraday cage, where you can't really get to it with any kind of access. So you're right. There has to be a tiering of focus, and you're right also about the board and spending. I would agree that it's quite different. So, for example, in a critical national infrastructure environment, the actual access to the systems and the architectural design of a process control system or SCADA network would probably be the crown jewels.
Yeah.
Whereas in News Corp, it might be your leads or your
Press is the main thing, where the material goes into.
Okay, there you go. So, and in terms of manufacturing, it's often, I spoke to one company that produces breakfast cereal, and they thought that when they did their analysis on they did an analysis on what was the most important critical infrastructure for them, and they thought it was going to be their supply chain or their factory. It turned out it was literally the processes in their factories and the manufacturing lines that were the most important for them, because if that failed, then they were unable to deliver their products. So you're right, you've got to get to the nub of that, and then figure out how to protect that first. The problem with DLP is that most companies will buy it, they put it in monitoring mode. Fantastic. Then they put it into enforcement mode, and it stops the business because it creates friction. And then the board of directors says, switch it off for us because we're special. And then the managers will say, switch it off for us because we're special. And then the employees say, well, you switched it off for them, you have to switch it off for us also. And it goes back into monitoring mode. Maybe monitoring for PII and for some specific confidential, but that's no use because that's not where the crown jewels are. So that's the problem. DLP in itself is good, but the configuration and the use of it. I always compare it to going to the US, and you're in the airport in the US. They've got the TSA pre-line, and you've got the normal security line. The TSA pre-line is for people whose behavior has been analyzed, and that makes it easy for them to go through. And the normal security line is for everybody else and it's friction. It's like DLP. So, can I create a security line in the airport where I don't have to check certain people because I know who they are, and I have to maybe search other people more vigorously because I don't know who they are? That's the premise of what we're talking about, so that you can actually, because by the way, security products, every security product ever invented has been designed to block. It's not been designed to help business. Business should enable, right? How do we enable business? Well, security products block business. So how do you find that balance where we're actually helping businesses go faster and get you faster through the system and reduce friction? That's the...
Yeah, I think protection has been the mantra all along, and the new age funda is about business enablement, right? So maybe Chinese walling something critical would come as a natural way of protecting something, but in this new era of how businesses are focusing on how to be agile, it becomes so critical that we need to protect at the same time we should be able to enable equally, right? There's a thin line. It's like, for example, if you want to open the internet, you want the employee to be able to access whatever content they want to access for business purposes, but at the same time you should be able to block them from any unwanted sites as well.
Yeah.
So how do you draw that line? It'll all depend on what is your risk appetite, the nature of data that you manage or handle on the ground, and what are the technology solutions that you put on the ground to help you achieve that purpose.
Just I'll give a bit of add on to that, because I worked mostly in the finance companies and telecom companies. Now I'm in media, right? Bank gives you a time to actually test in multiple cases, then approve a style in which you go. In media, you need to be fast-paced. You are in now, right? You actually, the news comes, it need to go there. It need to go just now. Otherwise, you are behind the other newspapers. In case you've heard something, it has to go into the print. It has to go to the. So what happens is, in case you have a function you found in an app, that need to go quickly, immediately, and you need to create adware so quickly so that you get that what you can say business or revenue immediately. So it's so fast-paced, right? If you want to enable such kind of business, like media industry, I'm just giving one example here. There might be many other businesses who have a similar problem. So think about, we don't see ourselves as a control gate process the way I used to be in finance company. We need to be the guardrails, right? We need to enable them go, right? Let them go, right? We will work on while they're actually working on, because otherwise we're actually running into losses immediately. Right? We are actually stopping the business, as you rightly said. We are the blockers.
Yeah.
We can't be that. So the challenge here with this kind of what we can say organization is certainly these kind of organizations are tech savvy, work with all the greatest minds and greatest technologies, and at the same pace, are we ready with the security components that are those technology components? Right? So as you rightly said, the CASBs become the discovery agents and tell you what you want to do, and then we might become like a people who are doing postmortems rather than actually detect and do something before, right? And by the time that information is gone, you might have already hit into that issue. There's no way we can come out of it. The balancing this, what we can say, fast-paced with security that requires what you can say time to adjust, analyze, and detect, report. Where is the time? You know, it's a what we can say tricky game to say. I mean, it's a problem not just in our organization where I'm working, but those organizations which are coming up, like small and medium organizations which are coming up, they have the same issue, you know.
And you add to that millennials.
Millennials, yes.
As millennials come into the business, they don't want to use the PC they've been given, they want a pink one. Or they want to use their phone, their Apple or their Samsung, they don't want to use the company issued phone.
Yep.
So then it just exacerbates the problem, because now if you don't make it easy for millennials to surf what they want, when they want,
Yep.
they're going to go to another company.
Yeah.
Because it's better for them, they prefer that environment.
Yeah.
So the bureaucracy and the ability to control is becoming harder and harder.
It's getting
and
dissolved
harder.
day by day. Yeah.
We have to find a much more intelligent or creative way to manage. You're right.
Yeah.
This is something on FORCEPOINT. Very interesting to know that you've gone ahead of the industry and the human behavior study and trying to implement that for controls. I think that's the need of the hour. But looking at the infrastructure, you need a robust infrastructure for anyone.
Yep.
You need extraordinary ability to go and track down your data and then go back and evaluate again what are your priorities based on the day. So we need to revisit that. Analytics, we need to change. Now, with these kind of things regularly revisited by a CISO, right? That's what a CISO does all the time, right? How does your human behavior thing, how does it bind it all? Today we rely on processes to bind it all. So for the human behavior aspect, how well is it binding with rest of the stuff in your whole package?
So as I said, I think you've got your day job, which is there. You've got your ITIL or COBIT or whatever you're using in terms of your process and your framework, etc. That's not going to go away.
Yes.
The behavioral technology is designed. We patented something called ERS. ERS is it's called Entity Risk Score, and basically the ERS is the bridge between behavioral analytics and the technology. So what the ERS does is it's the algorithm that gives you a score of a human being or an entity on the network.
Yeah.
And we call it entity risk score because the entity could be a printer, it could be an air conditioning machine, it could be a process controller, it could be a valve switch. And you want to watch for those kind of things behaving badly. Target was attacked through the
Yes.
air conditioning system, right? So if that entity had been monitored, had it gone to the point of sale system, it should have been blocked immediately because its behavior changed.
Yep.
So the ERS is a scoring system from 0 to 100, and that scoring system will then take into account the number of factors, which country you're in, which department you're in, your normal behavior, and if that deviates from a set median, the score will change over time. And as your score goes up, it will then enforce thresholds. Okay, so you get to a score of 30. Okay, make sure the DLP now encrypts every file that's transmitted. When it gets to 40, okay, block Office 365 access. When it gets to 50, ask for XYZ, or ask Okta to do a second sign-on, using a different tool to make sure that it really is that person. So the trick here is, yes, you need all your normal infrastructure, you need to do your normal ITIL, but then can the behavioral analytics be integrated to automate your tools so that you do not have to change your systems, that the systems automatically change. Policies actually are dynamic at the user level, based on that user's behavior. So that your media, your reporter can be out doing their work, but when their behavior changes, suddenly they lose access to the source data and then they can phone help desk. If it's a mistake, fine. If it's not a mistake, you stopped it. The good news is that if they phone help desk, it's not a whole department that's been blocked. It's one person, and that the help desk can manage.
It's actually prevent mode. It's always on the prevent mode for those cases.
Yeah.
So I have
Does that?
yes, I think it perfectly
Fits
kind of binds all the loose ends there.
Yeah. It's the ability to automate,
Yeah.
so that you can get ahead of the attack. That's the piece that's missing at the moment in most technology.
Got it.
Sure, you have to add something to.
I think I wanted to answer that. You started with saying that many times at the board level and at the users level that awareness is not there. So how to, if I use my words, how to get their cooperation. So I'm talking more about data because we are more into data. And about 8 years back when DLP started, same thing. So many incidents are coming and all this is happening. If you start doing data risk assessments, and even if you are able to find 2 or 3 breaches, which are very significant, you will definitely find, because we would have done hundreds of data breaches, and we find almost in all cases, sometimes it takes 15 days, sometimes probably longer, data breaches are found. And board doesn't understand the IP address and bits and bytes. They do understand sensitive data, intellectual property, personal data, financial data getting leaked. For example, you are a public company. Just 2 days back, your financial people are preparing a report, profit and loss and all that. Huge bearing on the share price in the market. If that gets leaked out, it's a huge, huge issue. If similar things are happening, which probably we don't know, if that is brought to the knowledge of users as well as the board, a lot of awareness can be created on that. So that was my bit of suggestions.
So, I have a question, because a lot of discussions here is onto the user behavior analytics, UBA, what we talk about. I have a different view altogether, because I don't want to believe into this. Why I'm telling you, and you can contradict what is my view, because I'm not a specialist. The thing is that I'm going into bit mathematical background of this. That UBI is nothing. It is basically the analytics of some data, which is in a matrix. I'm changing this. Suppose I'm using left hand mouse. That is one of my analytical approach. I work, that is stored. Suppose I have a matrix, and now every change is changed into the matrix value. Matrix A, matrix B, matrix C. Final matrix is this. It is keep on adding delta value. And the prediction what is to be done, that what the analytical reply, there is a answer, is basically today's date is in linear format. That is called linear algebra. Now, I'm a hacker. I know this, that this is a simple formula, A1 plus A2x plus A3x, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm a hacker. I'm getting into your network. By any means, let's see some backhaul, backdoor, A, B, C, D. I have some vulnerability in my antivirus, my firewall, anything. And I'm getting into the network. And suppose for me, it is trying to analyze what is that, how. I will have a polynomial regression. What is that polynomial regression? That is basically A1 x1, A2 x1 square, A2 x3 square. X is the value of the delta, what is my matrix defined into the analytics. That is, you are talking about machine learning. This is nothing but machine learning we talk about. In the mathematical formula, it is Jacobian calculus, where multivariable with single output. So the single output is x. Now I am taking a multiple value on the square cube, x1 square, x1 cube up to x to the power n. So I am sitting at your machine, I am able to analyze what you are doing, and I can do the reverse engineering into that. So there is no end. If I go into, suppose for example, n equals to today's just 1, tomorrow it will be 2. So the huge equation which will be multiple of n up to 100,000 lakhs, I don't know. So what is the end? So I don't believe the UBA. Not UBA. UBA is a valid thing. But the report of UBA and the security of UBA, I don't believe. Second thing is DLP. These two things are discussed here. DLP is a very vast thing. It is a psychological impact and philosophy of the company. I have around 2,000 DLP in our organization. FORCEPOINT is there, and we are having more than 10,000. It is going to increase in 1 lakh this year. That is the proposition. But see, the blocking, preventive mode is next to impossible, because what I think is a preventing for me, you may in a business or finance or marketing, he might think it is necessary for him. So is again some variable things comes in. So it is used as a only basically post-mortem. What she was talking about is a post-mortem. Is there any way for forecasting? Not possible. But I think what I told several DLP people in various also in your sessions also, that we should have the report, whatever the report is coming now. My report is 1 lakh. It's next to impossible to read that report, because I have 10,000 vendors. What I am sending to X vendor, Y vendor, Z vendor, nobody knows. So 10,000 into, suppose I have 13,000 users, you just imagine what is the volume. Daily, it is only for the tick mark. Until otherwise, we have a machine learning based or any kind of this kind of report structure, which can give, just like SQL statement I give, select star, something I write, from this database to from that field, from the, whatever is my query. Until otherwise the report structure is familiar and customizable to the customer, till then this is nothing. It is only a tick mark. Because you can block maybe pen drive, somebody is working on to pen drive, that will come from the endpoint. Or whatever the, suppose OneDrive to OneDrive you have for shared to some people, that may come in the CASV, what you are talking about. yeah, this person has done this things. But if that folder has up 10,000 files, can you read it? Maybe one file is data leakage. Rest of the 9,900 is an official file. It's next to impossible.
I agree, but that's why ML is so important. So I'll give you an example of one company that we're working with in New York. They asked us to do behavioral analytics on their traders. So it's the actual investment banking arm where the traders are doing supervisory control. So it's the regulatory compliance team that we're working with. It's not security. Nothing to do with IT even. It's literally the bank. So we're running regulatory analytics, the supervisory controls on the traders. Okay, this is a bank of many hundreds of thousands of people, but there's probably about 300 traders who can break the bank. So we're analyzing, we're ingesting the chat, we're ingesting voice from the phone calls, we're ingesting email, we're ingesting any form of communication that these people make. And of course they signed because what they're doing. And what this does, if you're in banking, you know there's 4 levels of supervisory control. And the supervisory control process is that they've got to look at the discussions and what was done the day before. You know, hour by hour, minute by minute, everything that was done. So what the UEBA is doing for the bank is it's providing context for the supervisors, and it'll say, check this person's trade at 9:05 yesterday, because we feel that there was something off, or that person, the sentiment, because we've got the algorithms we run even look at sentiment, so the feeling of a person. If their language changes, the swear words increase, for example, there's a sense that there's stress. At different times of the day, stress can change. When that changes, what decisions they're making can be affected. So they're getting a lot of value from this, because the system is actually able to look at the human and give them advice where to check for the supervisory control on the trades. Now, we went into the bank for the most recent QBR, and they said to us, we have been able to now start picking up DLP incidents on the traders that the IT department didn't pick up on DLP. We've been able to pick up mistakes and DLP risk where the actual DLP system has not been able to do it. So the request then is, can we connect what we're doing with these people to the DLP so that we can automate the protection to increase the blocking, number one. Number two, the other thing they've asked us to do is they've said, now can you look at the traders and tell us what they're doing most. What are they doing every day? So that we can now look to automate some of the most basic processes. If they're adding these 4 files to every email, can you tell us what they're doing so that we can automate the basic tasks? And if we can free 5 or 10% of their time, we're going to make them more efficient. So not only are we able to improve security for them through this, even though we didn't go there for security, we went there for regulatory compliance. We're able to do that, but we're also enabling an improvement in efficiency for them. So I understand your point around algorithms. I understand that. I'm not talking about haptics or on the PC. I'm talking about the person's interaction with IT, whether it's voice or chat or whatever you want to ingest.
But how you track this so many parameters? Because this is 100%. I'm telling you, for example, the banks, the most dangerous place for everybody, because now suppose if you call if you have a phone banking system, you call the representative of the bank and you just tell your number, account number, and ask for the statement. It is found, I think last 2 years back, in 2017, so far I remember, or maybe I forgot the exact month, there was a news in the paper that one person bank account was vanished because he was making the account stagnant for last 3 years. And the intimation was sent from the bank person to the hackers to hack that money. So we are because we are blindly giving the account number to the bank for phone call system. phone banking system, not the PIN or etc. But he is able to visualize, the visibility of my account is with him. So it is basically trust. We are working on the trust, but zero trust, just now you said. Forget about zero trust in terms of the technology. That is a different thing. But zero trust with human. What is the DLP? How DLP will help?
So fundamentally, we're never going to be able to stop everything.
Yep.
You're always going to have a situation. The question is, can we reduce the aperture of risk?
Yep.
And I think we can with this technology. I think we can. Quite frankly, I think my bank does a great job. They've got voice recognition. They know when I'm in a different country. The systems they use to analyze what I'm doing. Even yesterday, I checked my Amex balance, and it immediately knew I was in India. It sent me, can you do this text? Can you do this second factor of authentication? I was glad because it realized I was in a different country. That's analytics, behavioral analytics, in its very basic form. And I'm very grateful for the bank for doing that. So I agree with you, it's very frustrating. And I'd be more than happy to introduce you to some of our people in our X Labs. We have some people who have worked in very interesting organizations around the world, who have done some very interesting jobs around this. And I'm sure that on a technical level, I'd be happy to introduce you to some of them. These people are with doctorates in psychology, doctorates in maths, doctorates in analytics, and when it comes to the bits and bytes, I'm sure you'll have a very good discussion with them. I'm happy to introduce you.
Not that. But I have a question to you. Just one second. I have a question to you. The FORCEPOINT, not only FORCEPOINT, DLP. I'm talking about this kind of demarcation, that endpoint DLP, email DLP, then web DLP, so many DLPs and so many prices. Okay, so that becomes a very big headache. Take that, which one I don't know.
I think you actually totally solved my problem, because we always want to.
Yeah, it is a.
Then you will come up with UBA.
No.
UBA DLP.
So
I also always want to sell a suite. The problem is with the technical team, they want to get the maximum technical value. I think the issue comes when procurement comes, and then procurement say, don't need this, I don't need this, then you have to cut down.
So there's two things, The first thing is, number one, our philosophy as a company is we are working on ELAs at the moment so that we can get away with all that. You're right, it's complicated. We need to stop that. We need to come up with a simple way for you to do your job. The second thing as well is, from a licensing perspective, we're also working very hard to make sure that if you want to be on-premise or want to be virtual on the cloud, there shouldn't be any complexity for you either in the form factor. And my commitment is in 2020, we're a $700 million business. We're not so big. We're not so small, but we're not a gorilla. You're going to find, I think, the big gorillas making it more and more difficult for you. We recognize that there's a big opportunity for us right now if we make it simpler for you. And so, please understand, we get it. It's not simple to fix, but we're working on it, definitely.
You wanted to add something to it?
The lady down there wanted to.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
So I think it is quite clear that any business that runs on internet carry similar type of risks when it comes to the data security or information security. But then, the degree of impact might vary from business to business. So my quick question is, because we have all come early morning to this event, which is exclusively put up by FORCEPOINT, and I guess some of us are FORCEPOINT customers, but many may not be. So if you could quickly tell us what are the solutions available from FORCEPOINT. We heard about DLP mentions multiple times, but if you could quickly tell us what are the different solutions that you all have to address these challenges that we talked about, it'll be helpful.
Can I take that first?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And by the way, we are, first of all, we're humble. We don't expect to be the only supplier. Okay, we don't expect to be the only solution, number one. But number two, we are hungry and we want to serve you in the best way we can. So it's very respectful that we are not the only people out there. There are 3 areas that we are focused in. This is the best way to explain what we do. The first thing I will say is that the industry is changing. We talked a lot about data. The one thing we didn't talk about was the network. What's happened is, with Office 365, is that the network has become very, very, very challenged. We know that with Office 365, the latency on networks has become impossible. And so what Microsoft has recommended to its customers is, do not use the hub and spoke methodology anymore. You should break out at the factory or at the branch. You should break out into the internet directly to reduce latency. And we know that that has caused the explosion of SD-WAN. And SD-WAN is the new networking tool. We know that the networking managers have driven SD-WAN and not so much security. So there's a challenge. We know that this is a growing phenomenon. And we know that, and I don't know if you read the recent Gartner white paper called SASE, which is this new secure edge discussion that Gartner are raising around the challenge that things like Office 365 are creating in the network. Why do I mention this? Because we have CASB, we have DLP, we have next generation firewalls, we have SD-WAN, we have DLP, we have data threat technology for government, and one of them being a software diode, which will filter information in the cloud. We can talk more about that. It's very interesting for banks and that as they move to the cloud. But we have a number of different technologies in the proxy space as well. So what we believe is happening, based on the SASE white paper from Gartner, is that there's a convergence of technology at the network, on the network layer. So we see SD-WAN, firewall, proxy, CASB specifically, merging into one solution. Because at the branch network, they need to, I'll tell you one bank in Africa, a big bank, they've got 8 people in Dubai, 8 people. They've got 2 racks of equipment just to service 8 people. 8 people in a remote branch because of the requirements for security, etc., etc. We are suggesting to them that they can reduce all of that into a box, the size of a cornflakes box. So what you're going to find from FORCEPOINT as we go into 2020, probably mid-2020, we're going to release a new product called Dynamic Edge Protection. So Dynamic Edge Protection will have all of the features of proxy, of CASB, of SD-WAN, of firewall, of all of the things you need to connect a remote branch network. We're also going to build that into an endpoint so that you can put it onto a computer, so that when that person's working in Starbucks or at the hotel here, it immediately provides a secure connection to a cloud stack where you're able to do all the security requirements and route the traffic through the company's cloud stack to cleanse it. So that's the first requirement, I think, that we've got to understand. Why is that so important for a data protection company? Because the pipes where the data goes needs to be managed if you're going to protect the data. You need a proxy to be able to decrypt the data stream so that you can do your DLP on the data stream. So the Dynamic Edge product will be available. And by the way, even telcos are looking at it, so they can provide it as a service. That last mile to the customer can be provided either by a service provider or can be bought by the customer. So this Dynamic Edge Protection will be our one stack of technologies converged. The second stack of technologies is our data protection stack, which is DLP and our FORCEPOINT behavioral analytics. So we call this DDP, Dynamic Data Protection. So DLP is the old, DDP is the new. So now we've got 2 stacks. We've got Dynamic Edge Protection to look after the edge of the network. We've got Dynamic Data Protection to look at the data. And the third stack that we're looking at is the users themselves. And this is a stack we're going to call Dynamic User Protection. And this is where we have insider threat and analytics, And you would look at our insider threat technology, which will record keystrokes, which will record mouse clicks, which will take a video shot of who's on the computer. And that would be used, by the way. The use case there is, for example, in the power company, when they log on to the admin for the grid, you want to record every keystroke that that person makes when they're on the grid. When they come off, maybe you want to stop recording, up to the company's policy. If the ERS score of the person goes up, do you want to start recording what they're doing? If based on privacy rules. And then dynamic user protection will also be involved with things like CASB. And when you talk about, we can talk about reverse CASB. So reverse CASB is very useful when you look at suppliers coming into your network. You can look and see whether there's malware coming in. You can see what applications are trying to access your network. We have one bank in London who has internet banking, so born in the cloud bank. And they're using CASB, they're pointing the CASB at their internet banking customers. And what that means is that when I log on with my phone, it can tell the bank whether this phone is jailbroken, whether the phone has got a virus or a malware on it. And then that bank is now providing a service to the customer saying, beware, your phone is creating a risk for you. I can't tell you what to do with your operating system, but I can tell you that it's creating risk. And maybe as a bank, I'm going to reduce my insurance for you. Or maybe I'm going to change the way I provide your service based on the risk that you present when you log on to our systems. So to recap, dynamic edge, dynamic data protection, and dynamic user protection are the three things we think are the important solutions, all of it underpinned by behavioral analytics, so that we can make it smart and we can weaponize that technology to be more proactive in security. And what you'll find with that group of products is that there is no company on earth right now, not even the yellow one that's just been bought, that can do all of that. None of them can do all of that the same as we can. So we're pretty excited about the strategy. Right now, you can buy CASB by itself, you can buy proxy. If you're using web proxy, you can buy DLP. And what will happen is that we will have a path for you as we start to integrate these technologies. And as we move into next year, you'll find that it all becomes a composable service in the cloud as a platform, so that you can start to just choose the services you want and then provide for those services. We do have a separate business in government, in defense. So we're the largest insider threat provider on earth for government, mainly the US government. And we will continue running that separately. But there are some products we declassify for use in commercial environments. And the products we declassified right now is an insider threat commercial product and a product we call Data Guard. Data Guard is really interesting right now if you're going into the cloud. But how many of you know what a software or a diode is? You know what a diode is?
Yeah.
Basically, the military will use it for moving from a public to a classified network.
Yep.
Okay, so Data Guard is a software diode.
Okay.
And it's bidirectional, by the way. You can use it in both directions. So what that does, if you're looking at containerized technology in the cloud, you could use a software diode to make sure that the data moving out of that cloud into a different section is specially very well controlled, so that you can really reduce the risk of data moving from one cloud to another, which is very, very important for government agencies, and we're looking at agencies all around the world are looking at this. But also I think banks are starting to pay attention to it now as well. Lastly, I think banks and that are very well versed on DLP, but I think the new thing that the banks are looking at now in Asia are insider threat. Insider threat's the big buzzword for the banks, the big banks. And that's kind of where I think the big focus is right now in terms of the next step from a technology perspective. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so
I think,
much.
yeah.
Do you have a customer experience center in Bangalore or somewhere?
We have a big.
Lab where you can come and experience.
Can you say again, please?
Customer Experience Center, do you have one?
Oh, yes, very much. In Prestige Blue Chip, we have a big support as well as engineering
So
thing,
the
and
Bangalore-
also,
If there's anybody from the Bangalore team that can, he can address your offline, yeah, please take it.
and also I would like to add that thank you very much for taking interest. I'm sure many of you would be wanting a deeper conversation and maybe a kind of workshop. Vinny, we are going to have some feedback form. So if you can put some comments, and then our technical team will reach out to you and make the arrangements for the workshops.
One last point about cyber experience. You raise a good point. So we spent north of $10 million, probably about $11-12 million, on a cyber experience center in Boston, in the US. It was opened in April by the governor of Massachusetts and by the head of the Senate Cybersecurity Committee for the US. They went through the Cyber Experience Center because cyber is so hard to explain. They went through it with our CEO and they were shocked. It's like I say a Disney experience because you actually interact with the technology. And so if anybody is traveling to the US, or if your board members are traveling to the US and you want them to experience cyber in a very real way, they are very welcome to come to our Boston Cyber Experience Center. I or my CEO or somebody will be very happy to take you through, and it's about a half an hour experience. And believe me when I say that board members, CEOs have been through it and they think that they're not going to learn anything. It's an experience worth experiencing. So please, if you have a trip to the US, come past, be our guest. This is a proper experience. You will love it.
Okay, so I think let's adhere to the timeline. It's already 10:30. Any other last questions, direct questions to Kevin or Surendra before we break? Okay, thank you very much. I think very engaging discussion, and the last point brought up by you was the one which I was trying to force on them, that please tell us what they refused and reluctantly refused to make a PPT presentation, which I think went in the favor of this whole forum. However, great discussion, Kevin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right from telling the history of how the things have evolved to how the things will be in the future, and also giving us some insights on what path FORCEPOINT be walking in the future, and the reds and blues, how they are vanishing. I quite like that. So thank you very much, and thank you, Surendra, for your presence as well.
Thank you.
Thank you to each one of you for being with us. So feedback form already there. Please fill it up. Give it us at the registration desk. We'll have a small token of appreciation to be handed over to you.
I think marketing put pencils because then they can change the answers if they're wrong.
I will take note of it and we'll start putting pens. Yeah. So I'm the custodian of this, so I ensure that nobody rubs it. Thank you very much. So good round of applause for each one of you. So, Vinny, anything else?
No, thank you so much. We definitely reach out to you, and we definitely have more events. And if you want any personalized workshops, our team would be happy to do that. So, thank you again, once again, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.